You pop out of a glowing glass pod in a Kaminoan embryo room. The DNA you were made of belongs to Jango Fett, some hotshot bounty hunter who probably got paid a fortune to let his genes become a factory blueprint. The guy was a good enough killer to be the template for an army, but the moment you see your reflection in the glass pod, you freak. Really? This guy? You can't help but wish you looked like some impossibly handsome smuggler from Corellia. Anyway, you've got bigger problems than that. Problems called Kaminoans, these creepy, long-necked aliens who run the cloning operation. After you've decanted from your pod, they inspect you like you're a bowl of cabbage at Whole Foods. The stakes are high right off the bat. If you're too short, too tall, or if you have an extra midichlorian, they toss you out. Luckily, you're mostly normal. Mostly. You make it through inspection and are assigned your shiny new identification code, CT-2238. Straight to boot camp you go. The Kaminoans didn't exactly give you much time to enjoy your childhood. Your genes are engineered to age twice as fast as regular humans. If you're lucky, you might make it to your early 20s before your grey hairs and bad knees kick in. To the Kaminoans, you and your brothers are nothing more than tools of war. The food they serve you was a constant reminder of that. Every day, you were fed synthetic food paste, a grey, sludgy goop engineered thing to provide maximum nutritional value. Frankly, it looks like Jango Fett busted all over your tray. You force it down, it tastes exactly like it looks. Every bite that didn't make you puke made you crave roast Nuna, fresh fruit, or even those terrible ration cubes troopers in the field complained about. Anything would have been better than this garbage. Anything except a steady diet of Republican propaganda. Right away, you were taught that the highest honor a clone could achieve was to die in service to the Republic. They made sure it stuck in your head like Liberty Mutual jingle. By the time you're 5 years old, you're thrown into rigorous training. For most kids, 5 is when you start working at some Sheen sweatshop in China. Not you though. You're given a live blaster, a few thermal detonators, and ordered to go to war with your fellow trainees for training purposes. And if you're curious what that training regime looks like, why don't you ask that Jango Fett corpse lying on the floor? Training was the Kaminoans' twisted take on natural selection. They made sure you knew. Weak clones didn't get second chances. Not even a Bacta patch. But before they send you off to kill each other, they slap a helmet 2 sizes too small on your head. Now you know the reason clones are notorious throughout the galaxy for shooting like they had Forrest Whitaker's eyes. There's barely any oxygen in this stupid headgear. Oops. Another one down, I guess. It might be the ill-fitting helmet or the constant screaming in your ear, but for as long as you could remember, a sharp pain on your left temple has been bothering you. The Kaminoans don't tell you why. You ask one of your trainers about it and he just shrugs you away before tossing you into your 6th war that day. Guess that's a problem for another day. If there was one thing worse than the training, it was Kamino's weather. Endless rain. Not the gentle, relaxing kind either. This was a torrential downpour that sounded like 1,000 blaster bolts hitting the walls. Every day, every hour, without pause. You were barely a year into training when the Clone Wars erupted. You and your brothers were yanked from Topoka City and packed into a gunship like cargo. Your first battle was on Geonosis. Nothing could have prepared you for it. Kaminoan training was intense, but real war was a different monster. Blaster bolts lit the air like it was New Year's Eve. As the days went on, you start to feel like you're being taken advantage of. The Republic used you, cheered for you, and then they'll forget you the moment the battle is over. But there was no time to think about that. Not when there's 1,000 Jango Fetts with faces twisted in terror laying all over the ground. The Jedi were kind to you, at least. They were the one silver lining in this whole nightmare. They fought alongside you, not behind you. Even higher-ups like Mace Windu saw you as an equal. He never called you by your designation, C2-2238. He called you a Then Order 66 changed everything. Palpatine's voice crackled through the comms. That old soreness in your left temple flared into a searing pain. Your body started moving on autopilot. You turn and point your blaster at Mace Windu, and he looks at you and just says, I guess that wasn't a term of endearment after all. And just like that, the Emperor won the war. When the dust settled, you felt as hollow as the Republic's promise of free healthcare. The Jedi who treated you as equals were gone, and it was because of you. And yet, no matter how much guilt churned in your chest, you couldn't do anything about it. That soreness in your temple was actually a control chip implanted by the Kaminoans to ensure absolute obedience. The chip had flipped a switch in your brain that overrode your free will and made you turn on the Jedi. You hated yourself for it. Every time you looked in the mirror, you saw a murderer staring back. But the Republic didn't care about your guilt. They gave you new orders and expected you to carry on like nothing had happened. Victory was bitter. Just like that Corellian whiskey they poured at 79's, the seediest clone bar on Coruscant. That place was home now. In here, you became the bum everyone made fun of. People knew you by smell. You're the drunk in the corner who pawned his blaster for pod racing bets and owed credits to Jabba the Hutt's goons. You're a regular outside the bar too, right inside the garbage bin. Who's this? They're a bit too sexy to be a bouncer. This right here is a Twi'lek woman with soft green skin and kind eyes that didn't flinch at the sorry sight of you. She must be a prostitute. I mean, why else would someone approach a guy who looks more desperate for a woman's touch than Jabba himself? You're wrong. This lady is the second coming of Mother Teresa. She cleaned the grime off your face, fed you a hot meal, and talked to you like you were a person, just like the Jedi did before you murdered them. Her name was Saraya, and she was the first person who made you feel like you were more than a serial number since the Clone Wars. She didn't care that your ugly mug was the same as millions of others. To her, you weren't a Jango Fett knockoff. You were again, but in the good way that Mace Windu meant the first time, before you betrayed him. For the first time since Geonosis, you felt something that wasn't alcohol poisoning. You actually found yourself wanting to be better, not for the Empire, but for her. It was the kind of feeling you'd read about in those trashy romance holo novels that the Kaminoans confiscated during training. You're falling in love. One little problem. The Empire didn't like it when drones like you had romantic feelings. They have more than enough Jango Fetts running around. So when your control chip notified them about you blushing and giggling like a little schoolgirl, they came for you right away. They stormed your garbage bin and dragged you away in cuffs.
Don't wait up,
Palpatine said with a wink. You'd killed Jedi, you'd survived war. But this? Saraya being that wrinkled raisin's baby mama? It broke you in a way that a blaster never could. And as if that wasn't enough punishment already, you were sent to serve directly under the Empire's newest enforcer, Darth Vader. Under his command, you lived a life of suffering. Vader's temper was a bigger minefield than the Hoth asteroid belt. You heard he force-choked an officer for putting sugar in his coffee, and another time he force-choked a trooper for breathing louder than him. The man was 6 feet and 8 inches of pure anger. He made you do things like polish his TIE fighter with your bare hands, whilst he was still flying. You tried complaining to HR, but he just made them polish with you the next day. Being his minion was a death sentence without overtime pay. Escaping was out of the question, thanks to the control chip in your head. The worst part about being his lackey, though, was that you had to relive the horrors of killing Jedi. He'd track them down, toy with them like a Nexu with a mouse, and then finish them off Mortal Kombat style. You've heard of horrible bosses before, but this guy was the real sadist power by the dark side of serious mummy issues. You served under him for 19 years. 19 years of moral crimes, horror, and fear. In that time, you saw the extinction of your own kind. The Empire didn't need clones anymore, so they replaced your brothers with brainwashed loyalists who worshipped the Emperor. One by one, your brothers were phased out, reassigned to backwater posts, or quietly disposed of. It was like watching an endangered species disappear in real time. You wished you'd suffered the same fate as them, but now it was time to man the Death Star. And who did Vader want to move in? You. Living with the galaxy's most terrifying roommate was far from a dream come true. If it wasn't his wheezing ventilator keeping you up at night, it was him shouting whilst having nightmares of some guy called Obi-Wan. Wonder what that guy did to him. Surprisingly, life on the Death Star wasn't all doom and gloom. You played sabacc on your breaks, and you even got to kidnap a princess. But the fun came to a screeching halt when the rebellion decided to crash the party. One minute, you were polishing your blaster, the next, alarms were blaring. X-Wings zipped through the trenches of the station, taking out turrets like they were popping bubble wrap. Inside, every trooper scrambled to defend themselves, but the rebels were ruthless. You heard it was some farm kid in an old flight suit that was tearing through your defenses like he'd done it 100 times. And then, silence. In those final moments, as everything around you went bright, you felt something you hadn't felt in decades. Relief.